speaker for today. We'll start right on time, knowing that some of you are probably here during lunch break and need to get back to work in about an hour or so. Just a little bit about an introduction before our presentation actually starts. This year, our campus read book is a Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. And not to spend a whole lot of time there, but Aldo was a leading figure in conservation, natural resources, a lot of environmental types of things that set the stage way back in the 40s for a lot of the groundwork, I think, in terms of how folks think about these topics today. But in the book, Aldo references hunting quite a bit, and his experiences with the land, with wildlife. And so as we think about topics that we would like to cover during our monthly Campus Read presentations, it seemed logical that the topic related to wildlife and hunting would be one of interest to the community and to our students. And so with that in mind, we contacted the North Dakota Game and Fish Department, and Bill Jensen volunteered to share with us the results of a study that is currently underway regarding 3 elk herds in North Dakota, and he's going to talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill Jensen. Bill is one of the big game biologists for the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. He's been with the department since the 1990s, native of Wisconsin. We were just talking a little bit about some of his experiences. Done graduate work at UND. I think your doctorate is from the University of North Dakota, so been in the state quite a while, and you worked with a lot of different projects. It's interesting to find out about all of the things that North Dakota Game and Fish is doing, particularly as it relates to the big game populations. I think as you kind of shared with me, which I didn't know, we're kind of on the fringe of a lot of these things. So some of the things that I didn't know were pronghorn in North Dakota. I lived a sheltered life. So we're pleased to have Bill here, who is really an expert on a lot of the topics related to the big game in the state. And I think with that, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I said you even have some props with you.
I do. I notice the audience is much like the church I attend. Everybody goes to the back. But this is a radio collar I picked up yesterday. The GPS collars that you put on the elk have a prop for today's talk. I was really pleased to be invited here today. As a native son of Wisconsin, Aldo Leopold is an important figure in my life, and his writings of the Sand County Almanac and game management are, I think, rank right up there with Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring as books that really have long-lasting meaning to our perception of wildlife in the natural communities. Well, today I'm going to talk about an elk research project that we've got going. But I think prior to getting into that project, we really need to set the stage and talk about elk management in general in the state. So, prior to European settlement, elk were the most widely distributed member of the deer family, and found across the continent. But during the 1800s, as a result of unregulated hunting, the populations were decimated. So by the end of the 1800s, they were limited to just a few herds in the west, particularly the Yellowstone herd. But as a result of the efforts of people like Theodore Roosevelt and his friends, they developed a set of criteria for game management that resulted in comeback of not only elk, but white-tailed deer, wood ducks, all sorts of game species. And we really, what that is now translated into is the North American model of wildlife conservation. And we really owe thanks to those people. With the comeback of the elk, it's been a boon for hunters, wildlife enthusiasts, and photographers. But with an animal like an elk, there are pluses and minuses. Elk do cause depredation problems, particularly when those herds are in an agricultural landscape. So, you know, even when you have a modest sized herd of 100 animals spread out over a county, that might not seem like very much. But as a herd species, if all 100 of those elk are in Ole Olson's alfalfa field, they're a big problem for Ole Olson. So you really need to be engaged with elk management, even when you're dealing with small populations. Well, I think prior to getting into the talk itself today, I'll give you some background on the history of elk management in North Dakota. As I said, due to unregulated hunting, elk had been extirpated from the state or eliminated from the state about 1900. The last one was shot in a partial area. In 1942, a civic group based in Killdeer, who called themselves the Town Criers, brought in some elk. I believe they're from Yellowstone, small herd, 10, 15, and released them in the mountains, Killdeer Mountains. And they hung around for a while. They didn't do well. They got into problems, and they went away. But decades later, in the early 1970s, the department started receiving reports of elk showing up in the Pemmican Hills. And these animals probably drifted down from Riding Mountain in Canada. Then in 1977, there was an accidental release of elk in Mandaree from a corral. And those animals were the start. They drifted into the Badlands and killed their mountains. And the end result was the establishment of elk in the northern Badlands. The first modern elk hunt in North Dakota since it was closed, over 80 years before that, was in the Pemmican Hills, and there were 10 licenses available. And hunters were given the choice of either harvest moose or elk. And they're almost all successful, and there's an elk harvested that year. So that was the first year an elk was harvested. At that time, Unit E1, the western border was Cavalier County line. And that, you'll see a progression as we go on here, of the movement of that boundary. In '84, we had the first elk season in the northern Badlands. That's where they got established in '77. And the western boundary of E1 moved that year to the Towner County line. In '85, Theodore Roosevelt National Park brought in 47 elk from Wind Cave National Park in South Dakota and released them in the park. And they quickly got established and started a herd there that grew really pretty rapidly. And that same year, the western boundary of E1 again moved to the west, to the Rolette County line. By the mid to late 80s, we were getting reports of elk in the Turtle Mountains and Sioux County. The Turtle Mountain elk were for the most part, bulls, young bulls that were drifting down from Canada and showing up in the fields. And the Sioux County ones, I don't know, but I'm presuming that those animals drifted in to the area from the Theodore Roosevelt National Park areas, because we had reports of other animals from Theodore Roosevelt Park moved to that area. By 1993, the department was petitioned by a group in the Bismarck area to get elk from Theodore Roosevelt National Park and release them in the Hawaii Bottom south of Bismarck. And the department was philosophically opposed to that. We're not into, if a herd establishes itself on its own, we'll do our best to manage that. But we're not really in the business of establishing new herds in the state, particularly in a state where 90 to 95% of the surface area is in private ownership. And they're really, the public land south of Bismarck is very thin and narrow, and it's divided by the Missouri River. So if we would have been brought out down there, we would have been essentially dumping them on private land and creating problems for landowners. So that wasn't done. Then in '97, we had the first season for elk around Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And in '84, we split that unit into E3 and E4 so that we could concentrate some hunting around the park itself. We didn't have everybody wanting to hunt the fence line. We were able to spread out the hunting pressure a little bit. Then in 2007, the department was petitioned again to get elk from Theodore Roosevelt National Park and release them in the Turtle Mountains here. And again, we opposed that on two grounds, really. One was we didn't feel we had enough public land there to really support an elk population. We would have been creating problems for landowners. And two, at that same time, CWD was becoming an issue in the country, and the National Park Service had established a mandate that no elk for big game could be moved from national parks. They didn't know what they're dealing with. They didn't want to be spreading the disease around. So even if we wanted to, which we didn't, we couldn't because there's a federal mandate against moving elk. Then in 2008, we established Unit E5. And E5 is, we have E1, 2, 3, and 4, which are established elk units. E5 is basically the rest of the state. And what that does is, so for example, you drew a tag and you're leaving Botno, and your hunting unit is in the Badlands, and you get down by Max, and you see a bull elk standing in a field, and you have a license for a bull elk, and you have permission from that landowner, you can harvest that animal. And the philosophy behind that is that these elk were wandering in and in areas where we couldn't functionally manage a herd there. And they'd just be causing problems. So rather than the department, trying to capture the animal, move it, or have to just shoot it, it gave a hunter an opportunity to harvest that animal. Then in 2009, we had eliminated the turtle mountains from that original year in 2008. But in 2009, we made the Turtle Mountains part of that E5 unit. In 2013, we moved the western, we were starting to get more and more observations of elk on the Turtle Mountains. So we moved the western boundary all the way to Highway 14 where it is now. So essentially the entire Turtle Mountains became a unit eligible for elk hunting. And then that same year on December 30th, 2013, the department receives its first elk depredation complaint that we have documented, where the landowner didn't cut up. And so we increased tags, and then in the spring of 2015, we were getting issues with these small elk populations in Pemmon Hills and Turtle Mountains and Sioux County. We really felt we needed to look at elk more closely and basically do a pilot study and to see, get some real basic questions answered for us. So in the late summer of 2015, we signed a research contract with University of North Dakota, got graduate student work on the project. And that project is what I'll be talking about in a little bit. And that got underway in the winter of 2016. Then this past year, now we have this big E1 unit that runs from Minnesota to Minnesota border to the other side of the Turtle Mountains. It's a big area, and in order to, for two reasons. One, to focus hunting pressure, appropriate hunting pressure in the Turtle Mountains and Pemmon Hills, the unit was split. And that also gave gratis hunters, gratis landowners that wanted to hunt in the western part of the unit a better opportunity to draw. Okay, they weren't in the mix of those 10 to 15 people. Didn't have to go into the mix of 70 people in the western part, eastern part of that hunting unit. So they'd have a better chance. So this past year, the Pemmon Hills, we had 70 licenses available. Turtle Mountains, there are 40 licenses available. Northern Badlands, 140. Southern Badlands and Roosevelt Park, 130. Then we have this big E5 unit. And then in an arrangement with Standing Rock Indian Reservation, we established a hunting unit this year, E6, in Sioux County. And Standing Rock Indian Reservation issued some licenses, and we issued 7, two analysts. And then we have 2 licenses available for charity foundations, and for a total of 389 elk licenses issued this year in North Dakota, 15% of which go to gratis hunters or landowners that have documented elk problems. So why an elk study? Well, as I mentioned earlier, these animals are moving into and colonizing new areas in the state where we haven't had elk, probably for the better part of 150 years. And that, as I mentioned, even modest-sized elk herds can cause localized depredation problems, and we just didn't know a lot about these herds. The objectives of the study were to get some basic demographic information on elk in these herds and estimate home range and habitat selection. What we were looking for, we wanted to look at differences in home ranges based upon the herds, the seasons, and the time of day. This just shows the distribution of those 3 study areas. And habitat-wise, they're really quite different from one another. The Turtle Mountains, as you know, is a high plateau with oak aspen forests and small lakes and agricultural fields. On this side of the border, we have about 50% in ag and about 50% forested. The Pembina Hills is less forested, but the forested area is basically not the result of a high plateau, but the downward cutting of the Pembina rivers, creating pools that provide habitat. The Porcupine Hills are really an uplifting of mixed and shortgrass prairie that creates an escarpment that's eroded away and has these drainages that run east in the Missouri River. And so it's highly dissected with these woody draws. They're primarily oak. There's some ash and other deciduous trees in there, but there's not a lot of trees, and it's surrounded by shortgrass prairie, and it's some of the neatest country I've seen in North Dakota. Very few people get that area because it's access is limited and there aren't any roads, but it's pretty neat. Capture method, you follow the standard procedures. We hired a crew out of California to do the captures, and they put on the radio collars for us. And this is all they do. For about 9 months of the year, they put radio collars on wildlife all over North America, and they're very good. They can neck on, put on a radio, draw blood, age the animal, release it usually under between 5 and 10 minutes. So it's just, I had them work on a deer project where they did 50 whitetail deer in a day. But it's tough work, and they're phenomenal when they do it. We did draw blood, we took hair samples. The blood was drawn for testing for pregnancy. And we put 5 collars on each of the, on cows in each of the 3 study areas, so a total of 15 collars. That's a pretty small sample, but the collars are expensive, and I wasn't really sure we were going to be able to get the elk, get them on elk, because the forest cover that they're having to deal with. That didn't seem to hinder this crew, and they were done before we knew it. We programmed the collars to send out a location every 4 hours, and the accuracy of the collars was less than 10 feet. And then during the winter, when snow conditions permitted, we would fly, use these radio collared animals as Judas animals to trade the location of the rest of the herd, and try and get counts on where these animals were and how many, not so much where they were, but who was associated with them, how many bulls, cows, and calves were with them. We used Browning Bridge movement models to estimate home range, and we were able to program the model to account for sun rise and sunset, so we knew when locations were being taken during the night and day. The year was divided up into 5 seasons. Calving season ran from May 1st to June 30th. Summer, July 1st to August 31st. Archery season generally starts, depending on the year, 1st of September, runs about a month. And then the gun season generally starts 1st of October and can run through December 31st. And then, as we all know, winters can start earlier, but we attribute winter to January 1st to April 30th. And as I said, they put on these 15 collars in 2 days in February. And during that 14-month period, we were able to collect just over 36,000 GPS locations on these 15 animals. And then we used the Browning Bridge model to evaluate. Interestingly, after we finished our portion of the study, there was a national request for looking at the effects of the solar eclipse on animal behavior. And this came out of a group from Nebraska, and they wanted to know who had GPS collars on animals. And so we reprogrammed our collars to take a location every hour, and 2 weeks before and 2 weeks after the eclipse, and we sent that information to them in Nebraska. I haven't heard back. I don't know what the results of that. Apparently they have contributors looking at over 20 species of wildlife for that project. Now, the results. Well, the Turtle Mountain herd, on average, has a relatively small home range of about 17 square miles. And, you can see here, this is the international border right there. So they're spending about half their time in the U.S. and half the time in Canada. But during the calving season, they're spending almost all of their time in the forested areas of Turtle Mountain Provincial Park, with the dashed lines. This is kind of hard to see, but there's these smaller dotted home ranges inside the other polygons. Yeah, the purple doesn't show up here often. And then the solid lines are at night. So during the night, the cow, when she's feeding, she'll leave the calf when it's very young on its own, and then forage for food out onto open areas. But during the daytime, her movements are restricted, and around the calf. I went into that area yesterday, and I did my master's on white-tailed deer, and the thing, there is elk feces almost completely covering the ground up there in that area, and in patches in that area. And what it reminded me of was a deer yard, wintering yard, and because they're spending so much time in those kind of elevated ridges where there's a lot of wetlands there, so they can kind of get concentrated on these ridges up there. These slides are messy at best, but again, the dotted lines are nighttime locations, And the solid lines are the dotted lines are daytime locations, the solid lines are nighttime locations. And not all of them, but during the early part of the gun season, they're in the U.S., but they're smart animals and they've got a steep learning curve. After the gun season starts, they're spending most of their daytime hours in Canada, and then they'll be coming down across the border at night. And anecdotally, we had heard that from landowners and hunters too. This is the winter, and apologize for the colors again, but this is, these 5 animals spent the winter here. This is egg fields there. And there's a lot more to eat there than in Canada. And then this is just a conglomeration of all of the ranches and of all the individual, those 5 individual elk. So it just shows a pattern of where that herd spent most of its time. A couple things to note. Here's main highway. There's Peace Gardens there. They tend to stay about a mile away from the major highway, and we didn't see a lot of crossing of the highway. And then when we were starting this project, we had to coordinate with Manitoba. That was essential for getting the collars on it, and they're very helpful. And they shared some of their data with us, and from this data that we've collected, interviewing landowners, and the information that Manitoba's provided, it appears that it's not, we didn't know where these animals were moving particularly, but it appears that there's not one herd, but 3 sub-herds of elk in Turtle Mountains. There's a group of animals that are to the east of the highway and east of the Peace Gardens, and they're coming back and forth. And then there's this herd, which is basically this area right here. And then there's this herd where we didn't have any radios on, but from talking to landowners and conservation officers in Canada, there appears to be another small herd north of Lake Minnegoshi. So and it really makes sense socially, because once these animals are generally related on a matriarchal line. It's, grandmother, mother, calf, and they can only get so big and large, and then they need to split off to share food resources. So these are separate populations now, and probably not a lot of mixing other than the bulls traveling back and forth. In the Pembina Hills, the home ranges were much larger. They averaged about 70 square miles. So the elk in the Pembina Hills use an area 4 times larger than the Turtle Mountain elk. And they had much longer seasonal movements up and down the river systems. And again, numbers are low, so this is almost anecdotal observations. But if you look here, this is a cow that was pregnant, and she has during the calving season has a relatively small home range, and it's concentrated right in the river system. During the daytime, she doesn't leave the bottoms, and then during the nighttime, she might extend out and feed in the surrounding ag land a little bit, but doesn't venture very far. Now, this is an example of an open cow, a cow that wasn't pregnant, and they have a much different pattern in the home ranges. Their home ranges are larger. This is the other, if we were to put the other cow on top of this one, the previous one had an area this size. This one, during that same month, had used a large area here, large area here, and large area here and here. So they unencumbered by having to take care of a calf, they were traveling much wider over the landscape and using a wide variety of habitats. And then even during the day, they were extending their use out into open country. In the Porcupine Hills, the home ranges averaged about 28 square miles. And that's kind of intermediate. It's about twice as large as the Turtle Mountains and half the size of the Pembina Hills. And that escarpment that I told you about, that runs right here. There is ag land out in here, which they will use, but they're primarily along that escarpment ridge and out into these wooded drainages that extend out into the east. When you look at an individual home range of the elk and the Porcupine Hills, they're using the same habitat basically for all different seasons. You know, different portions of it might get used more, but it's basically overlapping the one right on top of the other. And then when you look at all five of those, it's all five of those cows were basically cookie cutting over the same area. Again, small sample size and supposition on my part, but it would suggest to me anyway that habitat is very restricted in that area, and they're probably pretty close to carrying capacity down there. And the area can't support much more, else they're going to be boiling out into new areas. Well, the overall results of this, there were some significant differences in home range sizes between day and night for each of the herds. And during the seasons, there's quite a range of home range sizes for the different herds. The only thing that appears uniform is that during the hunting season, they all have very big home ranges. They're probably getting disturbed. So they're moving a lot more. It's also a transition period between summer and winter range. And even though in last year when this gun season, this was the 2016 gun season, there wasn't an elk season in Sioux County. There was deer hunting in that area, so, and the elk aren't been distinguished between a deer and an elk hunter. So they hear a rifle go off, they're going to react to it. There's a lot of, I think, complexity in looking at for patterns in these home ranges, and this is just one elk in the Pembina Hills. During the 5 seasons we looked at, during the day and night, and then cabin, summer, archery gun, and winter season. And you can see the ebb and flow of movement and movement from one area to another. So it's not all, I don't think, intuitively obvious what's going on. The next step for this process will be to look at habitat resource selection, and that's being done right now. I hope to have the results back by the end of the year in December, if not shortly after that. And we're going to look at what habitat types and resources are most important for these animals during the various seasons. So, in conclusion, we did find differences among and between elk herds across seasons and between night and day. And there's interaction between these various factors. As far as management implications, we've already, before we even, I even got the first draft of the first chapter on this from a thesis, we extracted some of the data to set up unit boundaries for the E6 unit in Sioux County, so that we've already started using some of this information. And we hope to be able to extract much more. One of the side benefits of this project, I think, was this, to my knowledge, and I've been with the departments officially and unofficially since 1984. This is the first time we've ever had a wildlife research project that cooperated with Standing Rock Indian Reservation. And they were very helpful, and I really hope that we can have more of these projects, not only on elk but other game species. I think both agencies benefited. And there's a lot of people to thank that. These are the people that actually worked on the project for data analysis and data collection and capturing that stuff. And these are the agencies that gave money. But I'd be remiss if I didn't thank other groups, particularly Standing Rock Indian Reservation, the folks down there, and then Manitoba Conservation, or Manitoba Sustainable Development, I think the new title is. They're extremely helpful and cooperative in getting the project off the ground. And they need to be acknowledged. And then finally, I want to acknowledge the landowners that cooperated on the project and allowed us to potentially mark animals on their land. All the elk and turtle mounts were captured in Canada, actually, but you never know where the animal's going to be. So, with that, any questions?
What is your estimation of the current herd number, turtle mounts in both sides of the border?
At the very least, 250. But it gets. We were only looking at one herd of the three, and there's a herd to the east and a herd to the west. They're not all. May not all be crossing back and forth on the border. So I put it at a minimum for that. And I feel fairly comfortable that it's probably higher. I don't know how.
You know, of the group you had callers, were there any that went south of Highway 5? I know you said they stayed like a mile from 281, but did they go south of 5 only?
They've come down to that little lake area.
Uh-huh.
I have a few questions, but I'll ask the one that's on top of my mind right away. The home range is calculated between the 3 different regions. Do you know if they figured out the percentage of locations that, like a 95 and a 80%?
Those are 95%.
These are all
These are all 95%.
95. Does it vary if it's done 50% or
If they're smaller.
much smaller?
I wouldn't say 50% smaller, but they're smaller. But these are all calculated at 95% intervals. There are a couple stragglers that, their animals will move out a mile or so around that. For example, we had one cow in Pembina Hills that went up into Canada, and but if you just look at 95% confidence things, that doesn't show on the stream.
I had another question. Between the archery and the gun, is there an assessment of intensity of use by hunters?
We've not done that, but by the nature of the season, I don't think archery season is disturbing to elk, and there aren't as many hunters afield of that time of season either. Because they're not, again, they're not going to distinguish between a deer hunter and an elk hunter. They're all carrying guns, and they can't take a chance. So.
I think for those that may not be familiar with the collars, I thought it was interesting you shared, it's quite a process. You hire that crew to come in and put the collars on. You might want to explain how the collars come off.
Yes, sir. I'm easily amused, but I find these collars pretty fascinating. They have, you're able to program them remotely to change the frequency of the locations, and you can set it at 15-minute intervals if you want to. The limiting factor is the battery. That adds all the weight to the collar, and you don't want to have it too heavy and burdensome on the animal. But the animal, and then at the end, you can refurbish these collars. These cost about $2,700 a copy. So we can't afford too many of these. A VHS collar that you put on a deer, that's about $250. You can put a boatload of those out. But with these, it's much more pricey. But you can get so much more information from this. And to aid in recycling these collars, they have a blow-off pin where you send a signal, and when that signal arrives sometime in the next 72 hours, you never know where the animal's going to be. But in that 72-hour period, the pin right here blows off, and it releases the collar. And then there's a VHS transmitter in it, standard VHS, like a radio frequency, and then you can go back and pick up the collar, and that's what we were doing yesterday. We were picking up these up in Canada. So.
How long is the battery life?
Well, if you had it at like one location per day, It's probably going on 2 years. There is a means of calculating that. If you're going to take a location every hour, it's probably less than a year.
When you captured these cows, did you put any bits at all?
No. Bits are vaginal implant transmitters, and the way those work is for the cow, it's like a small, basically looks like a tampon, and it's put in the vagina, and when the cow gives birth, it has wings on it that goes into the horns of the uterus. And when the cow gives birth, it pushes that transmitter out. And because of the change in temperature, the frequency goes from, you can hear it in the animal. You tune in the transmitter and you can hear it in the animal. But when it falls out and it's at a colder temperature, it goes to hit, 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 hit. And then you know that the calf or the fawn has been born, and you can go to that location and you know exactly where the fawn is born, because it dropped right there. And so that's another piece of technology that's very useful. And they cost like $175, $200. They're pretty cheap, but they've been out about 10 years now, and we use them on whitetail deer. But this project was kind of all tabletop on the computer. We didn't have anyone really out in the field following these animals around. If we were going to do a calf survival study or trying to get more information on a calf, then we would have used the VIDs, but we would have had to get the information. We would have had to have people right out in the field following those individuals. So this project came off really pretty cheap. It might not sound cheap, but with the collars and the capture and a graduate student for 2 years, it was $80,000. And capture was $15,000. No, about 10,000. These are 27 times, about 30-some thousand. So the graduate student was pretty cheap. That's always the cheapest part of the project. Well, I know that if there are any other questions, I thank you for your attention, and let's go.
And if you know of any other folks that are interested in the elk population, Bill's going to be back here tonight at 7 o'clock for a repeat. So, thank you.